There are moments when the world doesn't collapse all at once. It evaporates beneath our feet. A second ago, everything felt right. The routines, the commitments, the plans, the contracts, the certainties, and in the next instant, a fever, a number on the thermometer, a bead of unexpected sweat on his daughter's forehead. And the man who always bought time, security, comfort, now feels life slipping through his fingers. No investment buys relief when the breathing of your whole world turns into a question mark. That's when existence shows up naked. No mask, no title, no emotional armor. He holds her in his arms, not out of need, but out of desperation, like someone trying to hold on to his own soul. And while the car slices through the city like a nocturnal lightning bolt, the silence between them is louder than any siren. It's a silence that asks, what if it's serious? What if I lose everything I still have left? Inside the clinic, the world spins slowly. The smell of alcohol, the muffled sounds, the chill of the walls. Everything there feels like a scene suspended between two realms. And then she walks in. The doctor, her white coat a veil from a buried past. When their eyes meet, it isn't just a fleeting glance. It's two timelines colliding without permission. He freezes, not from shock, but from memory, from the dormant pain that barges back in unannounced. And for a second, time stops, not because of the illness, but because of everything left unanswered, hanging in the air. He says nothing. Neither does she. Yet there are questions in their eyes. Questions with no words, only presence. He takes a deep breath. The air feels dense, as if it has to push through layers of history before reaching his lungs. And in that tiny space between panic and hope, something inside him begins to shift. Because when life tears a veil of certainty, it also stitches the possibility of starting over. The heat radiating from his daughter's skin isn't normal. It's not just fever, it's a calling, a sign of something deeper burning inside. He watches her sleep on the white bed, too small to hold so much tenderness, and realizes the money he amassed with such discipline is worthless against a child's frailty. No amount can buy the rest he begs heaven for. The illness arrived unannounced, claiming the center of the house and demanding silence. Each drop of sweat rolling down his daughter's forehead seems to wash away not just her fever, but his own illusions. He senses, without fully understanding, that this sweat is a baptism, a secret rite where you learn by force that control is an illusion, that life is rawer and more mysterious than he ever guessed. Damp sheets, irregular breathing, the murmur between tiny teeth together form a new language, one you don't learn in board meetings or gala dinners. It's a language of powerlessness and, paradoxically, of the truest connection. In the clinic's narrow hallway, he whispers prayers without knowing to whom. Ancient words, almost forgotten, surface instinctively as if from another life. The man who always trusted contracts now surrenders to the unseen. He prays silently, eyes fixed on the floor, pleading for something beyond logic. It's a silence that slips under doors, echoes down corridors, touches hearts that have passed it with empty hands and souls full of fear. Because in places like this, where life and death cross paths so often, the walls know how to listen. And sometimes listening, breathing, waiting, and trusting, despite no guarantees, is all you can do. He grips his daughter's hand firmly, but not too hard, just enough to remind himself she's still here. That despite the fever, the uncertainty, the paralyzing fear, there is warmth. And where there's warmth, there's life. And while there's life, there's still something to do, even if it's only to love without knowing how to heal. There was a time when everything was simpler. Bare feet, easy laughter, afternoons under Grandma's acerola tree. But no one leaves childhood unscathed. Memories rush back like a current. Some sweet, others weighted with undigested stones. On that clinic bench, while waiting for news, he isn't merely sitting, he's traveling. Every minute of waiting is an inner crossing, and in crossing he finds lost fragments of himself. Fragments that still ache. The woman caring for his daughter, the one in the white coat and steady eyes, was once the pigtailed girl who understood his silences better than anyone. He remembers her laugh, the letter he never answered, the day she vanished without explanation. He remembers words unsaid, pride that sealed his lips, the emptiness that remained. And now she's here, just steps away, as if the past found a crack in the present and barged in uninvited. In the mailbox of time, certain letters never arrive. Words get lost. Absences echo like abandonment. He never knew why she left, yet never dared to ask. The pain of not knowing became a wall. One now began to crack, because his daughter burns with fever, and she's the one holding the thermometer. She's the one who might save her. And that's no coincidence. It's a reckoning, not between them, but between who they were and who they can still become. He realizes, chest tightening, that time doesn't heal everything. It reveals, and the past doesn't disappear. It waits patiently until someone faces it, looks into the eyes of what was denied, unlocks doors sealed by pain. And now, hearing footsteps in the corridor, he feels that moment has arrived. Sometimes what looks like a reunion is actually an invitation to walk through wounded childhood and maybe build a new bridge over the river of hurt. The diagnosis lands like a mirror: autoimmune disease, the body attacking itself, mistaking protection for threat, confusing what should be life for something to fight. He hears the term while staring at his fragile yet brave daughter, struggling to breathe. And suddenly he thinks of his relationships, of himself, of how he, too, defended against what he needed most. How, afraid of suffering, he built fortresses against affection, touch, vulnerability. She, the doctor, explains calmly. Blood seeks balance, but sometimes it gets confused. Sometimes it attacks what is part of itself. And he understands, not just with his mind, but his soul, because their love, that old love that never bloomed, was the same. A feeling born pure, then contaminated by silence, pride, flight. It wasn't ill will. It was defense. Each, in their own way, thought protection was necessary. In the end, they hurt themselves more than they shielded. He recalls moments that once felt trivial but now sting. Averted glances, unanswered calls, unexplained absences. The feeling of being misunderstood, showing affection with gestures that looked distant. And she, on the other side, maybe feeling ignored, thinking he didn't care. Two bodies, two hearts, attacking what they wanted most, afraid of being attacked first. And now their daughter lies between them. The intersection of past and present. Her blood waging its own civil war mirrors their own. The two adults trying to learn how to love without getting hurt. The medicine sits on the tray. But there's no safe dose of truth. Every truth carries risk, the chance to heal or tear open new wounds. He breathes. She breathes. They both know some things aren't cured with IVs. Maybe they're cured with presence, with listening, with the courage to see each other unguarded. In that cold room, something begins to warm, not from fever, but from finally recognizing sometimes the enemy isn't outside. It's in how we learn to survive. And in recognizing that, they begin, timidly, to remember there are more human and less lonely ways to survive. Together, he knew those corridors well, not the clinics, but the corridors where power moves in silence, where decisions aren't made with empathy, but with numbers, where deals are sealed far from light, and what's fair doesn't always win. He navigated these spaces with calculated coldness, believing that's how you succeed, that protecting the family name, the business, the reputation was the greatest love he could offer. But now, standing in a white hallway, watching his sleeping daughter, he wonders if any of it made sense. Her presence, the doctor's, rekindles other memories. She was a casualty of those corridors, too. Not hospital hallways, but offices, courtrooms, rooms where morality is sold in sealed envelopes. He remembers when his father tried to silence a complaint. The pressure, the threats disguised as advice, the injustice. She left afterward, alone, unable to explain, without the right to fight. He didn't defend her, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to confront the weight of his own last name. Back then, lawyers pulled strings like puppeteers. They controlled not just contracts but stories, snuffing out anyone who spoke up. Young and scared, he thought it necessary, better to forget, turn the page, move on. But today, with his daughter in a hospital bed, he understands. Nothing buried without true mourning stays at rest. Life will always find a way to collect what was neglected. The clinic doors creak. Each sound echoes old conspiracies. Seeing her stride with purpose down the hall, he knows he's facing someone who chose a different path. Someone who, though wounded, never bowed. She kept going without support, without justice. And he wonders, what would have happened if back then he'd had the courage he lacks now? Ethics here isn't for sale. It's dressed in white, holding a chart, asking questions with her eyes. She doesn't need to accuse. Her presence is enough. Because some truths refuse to be silenced. Some encounters don't happen by chance. And he understands. There's no real control when you live trying to smother your conscience. Only one kind of freedom is worth it. And it starts with the courage to face what you try to hide, even if it's late, even if it hurts, even if it costs everything. She was never just a doctor. Since childhood, she heard what others ignored, not just with ears, but with body, eyes, skin. The kind of listening that recognizes a silence louder than a scream. Now, facing his daughter, she sees more than a patient. She sees a story. She sees fear behind those eyes, tension in the father's shoulders, what no chart can capture but screams in every detail. That night she decides to act, not out of rebellion, but conscience. Standard meds aren't working. Protocols aren't enough. She adjusts the dose, small, almost invisible, but enough to change the course. A tiny act laden with humanity, challenging decrees because she knows the difference between healing a body and caring for a life. And life, she learned early, doesn't fit in forms. He watches from afar, sees her clasp the girl's hand with firm gentleness, sees her close her eyes a second, as if speaking to something greater, sees her listen not just to symptoms but to subtext, because she's after more than diagnosis. She's after meaning. Deep down, he realizes that's what always captivated him. Her blend of technique and tenderness, precision and intuition, science and soul. In the cold dawn, she walks the halls silently, each step carrying something invisible. The clandestine courage of those who love enough to break rules when life's on the line. It isn't rebellion, it's clarity. Ethics alive, love turned into action. In another setting, that move could be condemned. But there, watching his daughter sweat in peace, breathe easier, he understands. The world needs more of that daring. The kind born of care that ignores orders to obey what's essential. She says nothing. Neither does he. Yet in that silence there's a pact, a recognition that among all who hide behind walls, some still cross them with open hearts and heal, even without medals unseen. Because real love is clandestine, brave, invisible, and absolutely transformative. In a forgotten basement room of the old family home, he remembers the boxes, dust-covered cardboard sealed with tape and fear. Boxes no one dared open, filled with papers, old contracts, hastily signed documents. But their real weight was the unspoken. Compromises made in the name of the name, choices justified by tradition, silences imposed as survival strategy. He grew up hearing certain truths shouldn't be spoken, only buried. But now, seeing his daughter respond to treatment, seeing the doctor cross his path again, he feels it's time to dig. Cowardice gathers dust. It doesn't hide what's there, only makes it harder to reach. Each sheet he reads, eyes wet, reopens an old wound. He finds what he suspected. His father bought silence. Cases were shelved, names changed to protect appearances. And among the yellow pages, one signature chills him, his own. Young, unaware, signing anyway. The pen felt light that day. Now he feels its weight. Lines connect and separate destinies. Small gestures create chasms. His surname, once a badge of respect, now feels like an anchor, pinning him to a story he didn't choose yet helped write. In that private reckoning, he doesn't hate himself. He re-sees himself, the scared boy he was, the man in formation who feared confronting the system, the part of him that found ignorance easier. Thinking of her, the doctor who returned without bitterness, he wonders how someone moves on with such dignity after being chewed up by an unjust structure. She was discarded, forgotten, silenced, yet chose to care, to remain whole. Maybe because she learned to turn wounds into strength. And he understands. The only way to honor what she lived is to stop pretending not to know. To face the boxes, the papers, the names, and decide it ends here. Some inheritances shouldn't be carried forward. They exist so someone, someday, has courage to break the cycle. And in that hospital room, while his daughter sleeps peacefully and night fades outside, he decides it's time, not to erase the past, but to use it as compost so another story can finally grow. In the clinic lobby, dawn breaks with a pale light, but outside, flashes explode. Reporters crowd, cameras flicker like blades. The inner hush of corridors clashes with street noise. What was secret is now headline. A leaked document, a revealed name, an old scandal finally surfacing. He's at the center, not as a victim, but as heir to a system now gasping its last. For years his family shaped narratives, choosing who was guilty, who was forgotten. But this morning is out of control. Truth doesn't ask permission, it arrives. And with it comes a relief of no longer pretending. From his daughter's window, he watches his lawyer try damage control, and something inside him lets go. He doesn't want to control anything anymore. Sometimes falling is the first step toward standing with dignity. When officers enter, there's no surprise, no resistance, just a nod to the doctor holding his child gently. He looks at her one last time before being led away, and in that look there's no defeat. There's surrender, reconciliation with truth. The cuffs click, metallic like a bell announcing. It's over. Not life, but illusion, impunity, living afraid of himself. The crowd watches in silence. Some shout, others clap, most just witness, as justice finally lands where it never dared. In this courthouse without robes, where eyes are witnesses and memory is judge, something rare happens. A small piece of restitution, a collective gesture to reclaim trust. Inside, the doctor stands tall, observing. She doesn't cheer, doesn't accuse. She simply remains. For someone once wronged, justice isn't a show. It's breath, dignity restored, proof that going on without corruption was worth it. She knows perfect redemption doesn't exist, but new beginnings that heal do. And he, entering the van, feels this is his not absolution, but rebirth, even if it starts behind bars, because when lies fall, the soul can breathe, even silently, even deep down, even in the dark. Days pass unhurried. His daughter, now awake, sits up and cradles her cup in both hands. Still weak, but alive. Her big, curious eyes scan the room, searching for what wasn't said, and maybe they understand because some silences explain more than words. The doctor enters, checks vitals, asks little, observes much. Between them there's a bond that needs no explanations, a presence that nurtures quietly. The father, elsewhere, awaits trial, but life moves here with the tenderness of flower bud opening through a crack in cement. The girl touches her belly where injection marks remain. She doesn't complain, she just feels. In that touch there's more than pain. There's memory. The body stores everything. Fears, falls, shocks, silent victories. Every mark is a route, a path traveled, a reminder that even vulnerable she endured. That resilience isn't learned from books. It comes from within, like sap climbing a branch that looks dry. Watching her, the doctor sees herself. The girl once alone in a hospital bed, crying quietly, waiting for someone to believe. Now, years later, she knows the pain wasn't wasted. It became soil, fertile ground where other lives can find hope. The scars she carries, visible or not, are maps guiding her through hard moments, compasses pointing not to where she wants, but where she needs to be. So, between tests and brief talks, the girl starts to rise again, not just physically, but from the inside out, calmer, more confident, more present. The fever is gone but left a legacy, a new gaze on the world, wisdom that can't be taught, only lived. Without realizing, she already holds what many adults still seek, the certainty that it's possible to bloom even in rush-trampled places, even in the arid fields of pain. Because time, that invisible surgeon, doesn't erase what happened, but patiently turns a wound into a bridge, the tear into a river, the scar into a map, and fear into a road. He returned weeks later, not the man he was, but one who'd walked through an internal blaze. Same clothes, different eyes. A deep fatigue that rest can't fix, and something new, presence. He seemed more whole, as if he'd stopped running from himself. He entered quietly, His daughter, already discharged, played with a notebook. She looked at him without surprise, only the calm of someone who always knew he'd come back, not as a hero, but as a dad. He sat beside her, held her hand gently. No long explanations, no rehearsed apologies, just a gesture. Being there. Sometimes the biggest apology is staying, showing up even without knowing how. He pulled out a crumpled paper, an old pancake recipe her mother used to make. It wasn't an attempt to fix everything. It was a reminder that real love is crooked, imperfect, but persistent. Over that improvised breakfast, among laughter and burnt edges, they began to find each other again. The doctor paused at the door, watching. She didn't interrupt. Seeing them together, she knew something inside her had realigned too. She no longer needed explanations or excuses. What he'd done for justice, and what he now did for love, was enough. Because healing doesn't come from what's said, it comes from what's lived. And when love returns without masks, it doesn't need announcing. It simply shows up in the everyday, in the simple, in the small gesture. Outside, the city rushed on, honking cars, people racing, clocks ticking off goals. But in that modest room, flowers bloomed in asphalt. Where sincere reconnection exists, life flowers, even slowly, even painfully, because love isn't forgetting what hurt. It's planting beauty in the space that's left and moving forward without guarantees, without a script, with only the courage to remain. That night, no one said a word, not from lack of things to say, but because the essential was already being lived. He, seated by his sleeping daughter, followed her breath like watching the sea return to rhythm after storm. There was peace, a silent, deep peace that doesn't shout its presence, only whispers. Life goes on. It goes on not because everything is fixed, but because now there's a new way to exist, lighter, clearer, more present. Outside, the doctor turned off the last light in her office, yet something inside her stayed lit. She knew some stories don't end, they just change tempo. What happened here, in this clinic among memories, hard decisions, reunions, and repairs, wasn't a period. It was a new foundation, a floor above all the ruins. Family isn't a finished building. It's a work in progress. Ancestral mistakes can become footing. Former pain can serve as support if someone dares not repeat it, dares to sustain what must change. At the house where he'd live again with his daughter, there weren't as many portraits anymore, but there was a small garden. He studied the ground carefully. The earth still bore winter's marks, yet signs of life were sprouting, and he understood. Explanations were no longer needed. Some truths don't justify themselves. They simply become soil, fertile soil for what comes next, for what can grow truer, with more listening, more silence. Because it's in silence that hope solidifies, not as promise, but presence. A firm, calm presence that doesn't need applause, that doesn't have to prove anything, that just breathes beside whoever stayed, whoever chose to love even without knowing how, whoever decided to turn the past into fertilizer and the present into shelter. If the story touched something in you, if at any moment you felt it was about your life, then you belong on this channel. Here, every story is a mirror, every silence, an invitation to transformation, every pain, a possibility of rebirth. Subscribe, not just to hear more, but to remember every day that you're not alone, and even the oldest wound can become the root of a new beginning.